Balancing personal leadership growth with organizational growth. If you know anything about me and about this podcast, this is like me, a pig in mud for this conversation. What leadership and growth requires of you on a personal level, and then how you kind of reflect that through the organization and through the expansion and the sort of, let me call it chaos that growth entails. My guest today is Kristi Rivait. She is the co-founder of Scale Collaborative. She's a lot of things. We had a fantastic intro call where we covered a mile-high group of subjects, and she's going to introduce herself in just a second. But I rarely read bios on this podcast, but there was so much in Kristi's that I thought would help you understand where she's coming from, and also why she is the perfect person to talk about growth and scaling. So Kristi co-founded the Scale Collaborative to support a thriving social change sector through capacity building, consulting, coaching, resource access, and system-level approaches. She is Scale's Director of Partnerships and Programs and co-developed Thriving Nonprofits, a revenue diversification leadership program. Now you all know why I'm so excited for this conversation, that supports nonprofits in building financial diversification towards greater impact. Over the past 3 years, Kristi has scaled the Thriving Nonprofits program across Canada and expanded it, here's the growth part, from a single program into one of Canada's top online learning, coaching, and community hubs for nonprofits. Welcome, Kristi.
Thank you, Jenny.
So how does it feel when,
to be here?
Yeah, I was going to say, how does it feel when somebody reads your bio? I just want to normalize that. What's it like?
It is fascinating because I think for many of us, we have different things that we accomplish in life in our professional side, then we have them in our personal side. So it really depends who you're talking with, who your audience is, how we actually get introduced. We're also multifaceted.
Yes, we are. That's a great way to put it. And you are so much more than your accomplishments. If you were to take a minute to introduce the other side of you, the personal Kristi side, how would you introduce yourself to our listeners?
My name is Kristi Rivait, and I really enjoy being out in nature. I love meditating and just becoming present and really being able to be open and listen to the universe. I'm a mom of 2 fantastic kids. Wow. So they're teenagers now. So I'm a chauffeur. I'll add chauffeur to my list. I also, was an athlete for a long time as a kid and did different sports. And I think part of who I am today is because of those experiences of what it takes to excel in sports, from team sports to individual sports. So I think some of those lessons of who I am really stem from where I grew up, what I did and who I am today. So that's a bit about me.
That's interesting about the sports, that drive, that sort of pursuit of excellence, not like a toxic, but in a excellence, like a pursuit of being better, a little bit better every day. That's something I talk a lot about this podcast. So bring us back a little bit. Like when I read your bio, there's multiple different things that you've started. There's multiple areas of growth. Start with the disillusionment. Like what brought you to this particular work, Kristi? Bring us back.
I grew up in a small town, and it was a factory industrial town, just like many, many of our towns. And we had a strike. And during that strike, I saw lots of families, including my own, really just trying to figure things out and needing support. All the families, all the kids had the same lunches. We were all getting, support for food vouchers. And I think for me, that really planted a seed around why is the company so focused on profit? Because the shareholders had actually made quite a significant profit that year, when all of these families and all the workers that actually were creating the profits were the ones that really did not benefit at all. And so a seed was planted. I was a young kid, but I remember thinking there had to be a different way, that this just didn't make sense to me, that there was a way to have profit, but also to really support the people And because I was an industrial town, maybe I also saw the environmental stresses that puts on your natural areas when you are an industrial town. And
Yeah.
if I fast forward years later, our smokestacks had changed because environmental regulations changed. And so I also saw the trees on the mountainsides grow, the change in what the water looked like. So I think between those combinations, that really set me on a path of how could we do something different? And I think, maybe there was something in me that always believed I was destined to be able to do something amazing in the world.
Mm. Mm. Do something amazing in the world. Um, the unrest, the push and pull of the social profit sector and the business world, and the sort of tenuous relationship that they hold together. Where were the seeds of when you went out on your own? Because I'm going to guess you had a life and a career under the umbrella of the not for profit
Mhm.
structure. And then you said, no, I can do this differently. Tell me about that.
Well, I had worked in a few different nonprofits, from poverty reduction, being a real frontline worker, to being a board member, to then when I moved, and I was a bit in politics actually. I was at the back end of
Okay.
politics. So I was the director of fund development for Vision Vancouver out of Vancouver back in like 2008 when they swept power. And took over the city. And so I really learned how to build movements and
Yeah.
visionary ways of thinking. And so,
Yeah.
of course, like everybody else, we wanted to buy a house. So we moved from Vancouver over to Victoria back in those days. My husband at the time was able to move his desk where he was working. And so when I moved over here, I decided I wanted to really focus on the nonprofit work and went to become an executive director of a community center here, which
Mhm.
I sort of saw as a little city. Right? It was a neighborhood, was just this little city, so it felt really natural to me. What was interesting is when I was with Vision Vancouver, I was at the back end because the director of fund development is not a counselor or a mayor that's out front. You're really in the back end strategizing and really thinking things through. Whereas when I became an executive director, I was all of a sudden
Yep.
that counselor, that I was that person that was out front. So that was a switch for me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think during that time, what I was able to sort of do in that organization, from the Vision Vancouver to that organization, and really I did things differently. And maybe that helped because I had been in nonprofits, but I didn't hear the message that we're not supposed to make profit, that we're supposed to sit in this scarcity approach. I never got that message in my head.
Interesting.
I saw scarcity,
Mhm.
and we used to have to hustle to even be able to create like the milk and the tea we wanted in that first original poverty reduction organization. And I just sort of thought we could do things differently. Why
Yeah.
why do we have to do things the way that we've been told they've been done? Like, we can do things differently because when we have money and resources, we have the ability to impact in a different way. And yeah,
So did you right away you saw opportunity differently than others? Is that a good way to synthesize that?
I think so. It's hard to say, but I do remember at that time being very shocked at some of the people that I knew in the nonprofit sector who I thought were just amazing. And they were amazing. They were
Yep,
amazing
I
leaders.
get
So
it.
I looked at them as mentors. And I remember talking to one in particular, and her being able to, telling me that she wasn't sure if she was going to run the youth programming the next year because it only depended if she got funding that she could have the staff.
Yeah.
And I thought, really? That's how you run your budgets? And that's what people are going to expect of me? That doesn't seem how
Yeah.
that's going to play out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I love that example because I can so relate to that example, right? It's a bit like that Zig Ziglar quote. You don't change when obstacles occur, you don't change your decision to reach your destination. You change the direction to get there, and you just encapsulated that quote with your approach.
Mm-hmm.
So right then and there, there's two things I want to talk about. Number one, boom, you're an executive director. You are out front all of a sudden. Many of my clients, when they get to that place, it can be very uncomfortable because they've been behind the scenes and they've always let the mission talk first. And one of the things I really advocate for is, no, you are the face. They need to be able to find you and you need to get comfortable with that. So using that theme of personal leadership, what was comfortable and uncomfortable about that? And how did you leverage it?
Great question. Great question. I learned a lot. And
I love that.
I
Okay.
wasn't always fantastic. Like I really did learn a lot. I think there
Yeah.
was two things happening for me at the same time. One was that the more I connected with other executive directors,
Yes.
I realized that there really was a disconnect between leaders understanding that they could make profit and do good with it,
Yeah.
and the status quo of how things had always run traditionally in the nonprofit sector. So that was happening at the same time as I came into an organization that had uh, three executive directors that were splitting different jobs. And so when they brought me in, I came on top of them. And those three people then went to just their regular jobs, what they were very good at. So there was a lot happening inside that organization. It wasn't easy because I was trying to chart a new way of doing
Yeah.
things, and that made some people feel very excited and other people very uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
I did have to make some hard choices that weren't easy to make.
Yeah.
And there was moments I was called a bull in the china shop.
Yep.
I was told that,
Lack of respect for,
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
That gives me, I would love to go back and be a fly on the wall and be there, Kristi, for those experiences. You bring up a couple things. One, I'm going to guess that one of the challenges in the shop that you were in was that there was not enough people doing too much work. I'm going to read between the lines with the 3 EDs, and the fact that making money and making profit or driving revenue, whatever that looks like, was uncomfortable. They had a, could we say that they had an unhealthy money mindset, or is that too far? What do you think?
Well, I don't think it was those particular people. I think
People.
it is deeply embedded in the sector that for some reason we think we have to make money over here and we do good over here.
Interesting.
So I actually feel like we could do it together. I did hold a all staff meeting and really talk to everybody about that all ideas were welcomed, that we were going to do things differently. And so when you had an idea, if we could figure out how to at least break even, we could test it.
Yeah.
Because we wanted to have more impact. Our
Yeah.
programs, we wanted to fill those programs. We wanted to fill our summer camps. We wanted
Yeah.
to actually, the drive around profit isn't around making money. It was really about how do we have the resources we need to leverage and to
Yeah.
do more good. And if you work in a community center, it's fascinating. You often hear, oh, you're a training ground for the city,
Oh.
right? Because when someone starts to get at that age, they get married, their kids might need braces, they're wanting a mortgage, so they leave.
Yeah.
And that really didn't sit well with me because there was these incredible, incredible
Yeah.
staff
Yeah.
that wanted to actually stay in
Yeah.
the role, but we're being forced out because we didn't have the resources to be able
Yeah.
to take care of the health and well-being of them and their families. So that was a shift. I thought, no more training ground.
Yeah.
We figure out how people can actually have careers
Yeah.
in nonprofits.
Oh, I love that. And mentorship and succession planning are some of my favorite topics, right? Building it from within, especially for some of those creative emerging shops, finding portfolios and files that people can grow into. And to your point, paying them appropriately and planning and budgeting for it. I'm always surprised when I stand up and present to people when I say the phrase, you are your most valuable asset in your shop, not the photocopier, right? Like if you think of your people as your most valuable asset, the way you treat them, the way you train them, the way you support them with professional development, that will be the greatest indicator. And the way you challenge them, Kristi. Let's just not include, I'll talk about challenge, because I'm sure there were lots of people I'm just going to play devil's advocate in the not-for-profit sector that are there because it's safe, that are there because it's comfortable. Not too much is asked of them. I'm playing devil's advocate, but I've seen it. There's a lowest common denominator too. And with your kind of leadership, how did people shift, change? What did you notice? And how did you continue that vision of growth? Because you had a plan to make things different.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I think what I saw is that some people left, some people were asked to leave, others stepped into their genius and just thrived.
Yeah.
And so if I think about the role of an executive director is responsible for an organization and their mission,
Yeah.
for me, and I wish all those people, all the people that I've ever interacted in through there, all the best, but it was the right thing for the organization
Mm.
because it was able to have incredibly more impact when we had the right people
Mm-hmm.
that were on the bus, not just the people that had always been there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was, that's a
Huh.
transition time. So there's a lot of change management in
Yeah.
there. So
Yeah.
as my own personal leadership journey, I learned a lot around how do you actually hold space for change management and how do you navigate through those because you are the person that everyone's blaming.
Yes, you are.
Right?
Yeah.
And on the other side, you have these other people that are just so thrilled to now be able to work in an environment that
With accountability, right?
they can
With
be challenged and
plans.
they can bring ideas to the table and
Yeah.
test and pilot and change. And so, you're just
Yeah.
kind of just got to keep believing in yourself and,
Yeah.
kind of taking one step forward.
Those are great points. And I think this mirrors a lot. I talk a lot about the transition from a number 2 to a number 1, and for whatever that might look like for folks listening, right? I mean, number 4 to number 3 is the same, but it's the ability to see, you can be a number 2 that abdicates all responsibility, shines all the light on the ED, makes them look good, but chooses not to think. Kristi, I'm being facetious, but kind of make someone look good, and then be surprised when you get passed over because you didn't actually put any thought leadership into the game. Versus being a number 2 who says, this is going to be a problem for Kristi. I think what I'll do is I'll write up a briefing note. I'll give her the pros and cons. I'll make a recommendation for her, and we can have a really healthy discussion. And I don't know about you, but I'd much prefer a number 2 like that.
Me too.
Right?
For sure. Yeah. And I actually, interestingly enough, Jenny, because, my career has continued since then,
Yeah.
I actually believe for my own personal growth, that experience of being executive director, and of course you have a board of directors that is above you. And so you are a number 2.
You bet.
So I think for me, my journey from 2 to 1 was actually leaving and co-founding my own, social enterprise.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about that. I mean, I have so many questions. Define for our audience a social enterprise, because I think that's a good place to start.
Right. Sounds great. A social enterprise is really a business-like entity, even though it can be a nonprofit, a for-profit, might be a co-op, that its purpose for existing is actually to have impact. That might be social, environmental, or cultural, but it's literally in the DNA of the business is that. And so what happens is the majority of the profits then go back into creating more impact.
So it's like the intellectual disabilities charity that they teach skills to the folks with intellectual disabilities, which might be packaging coffee, to which they sell the coffee and the proceeds go back into the organization, correct?
Yeah, that would be what we would call an employment social enterprise.
Okay,
So
thank
if you're
you.
employing people that might have barriers to employment, right?
Okay.
And again, generating those revenues through a
Right.
product or a service,
Yeah.
and then bringing those revenues back into, let's say, that nonprofit
Gotcha.
to be able to support, more programming or more staff or whatever that looks like. But again, those are revenues that the nonprofit is then able to direct how they
Correct.
want. Yeah.
So Tell me about those first, how many employees, because we're going to talk about growth today, right? This is so important. Tell me about those employees, that first, you said co-founder, like what was the kitchen table conversation like?
I met a woman named Kristi Rivait, and again, I truly believe the universe brought us together. A quick side note story: I was having my first baby in Vancouver, and we lived in the basement so that we could rent out the top of the house, by the room. So, always thinking creatively about how do we generate revenues. I think that's been a theme in my life.
Yeah.
Anyway, so when I was having my first baby and my parents lived on Ontario, I really wanted to be able to have my mom especially there. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to put an ad in the newspaper, one ad for 3 days. It's $60. Let's do it. So Kristi replied to that ad. And it turned out that her parents' house was only 12 blocks from my house. And if you know Vancouver, that's pretty spectacular to actually be that close of living. So she interviewed me.
Yeah.
And over the course of the next 2 years, my parents stayed at her parents' place because they traveled overseas a lot. They worked overseas a lot, for 2 months. Then they'd go back to Ontario for 2 months, and then they'd come back for 2 months. And so our relationship sort of started there. And then my family moved to Victoria, her family moved to Victoria, and we would just go for walks and things around what was possible in the social sector. And at the same time, in my own organization at the community center, we doubled our budget through earned revenue strategies. All staff across the board got 25% raises. We were able to purchase a building, put a social enterprise in there, do a lot of different things. And so now, time has evolved. I've got a new board of directors who are much more policy focused, not so visionary. And both are really important. But for me, I realize there's a cycle in an organization, and you need that entrepreneur. You have that founder, that entrepreneur. Then there's time for a manager who comes in and crosses the T's, dots those I's, and works on board governance manuals. That is not my So I knew it was time. So Kristi and I thought about it, and I thought, do I go? Because now I'd gone through a couple different organizations that had done this. So I thought, do I go organization by organization by organization, or do I start to look at how do we create change at the sector level? And so Kristi and we would go on these walks, and we have very complementary thinking and different skill sets, but very complementary skill sets. And we just thought, why not? Like, why don't we just try it? So, it's fascinating. I was 40 years old at the time, or like I was in my later 30s when we were having conversations. And I remember people saying to me, you can't do that. You're like 40. And I was like, I'm going to still do it. Like, I'm still going to do it. Like,
so where did that come from? And who are these people that tell you what you're supposed to do and not supposed to do?
I think we all as humans have voices all around us. And I saw this notion once around, like, if you have new ideas, especially if you're trying to do something that does not exist.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But I think it would play true even if you're trying to open, a pizza shop down the road. Right? As soon as you start telling people what your dreams are, they'll tell you why, well, I knew Betty and she tried that and that did not work. Or, are you sure you want to risk that? That's like your family's financial future. That seems more selfish.
Yeah.
Or this seems more like, is that the responsibility? You have young kids.
Right.
Right.
So that's that human negativity bias or negative bias. So the 3-to-1 I always talk about in coaching, right? So people are more predisposed to remember the negative than they are the positive from a biological. So we're always talking about topping things up with 3 positives to counteract that. That being said, it's no small feat to try and take on the sector, Kristi. So I want to acknowledge that here, that you were a strategic thinker, that you thought you could set things up differently and better. What did you tackle first? How did you make money first to put back in?
We took some contracts. We worked with another organization that we had a contract. So that organization was sort of trying to figure out, we've got about a 9-month runway. Do we shut the doors
Okay.
or do we not?
Yeah.
So we went in there and just thought, our first question was, are they having the impact that makes it important for this organization to exist? Because I
Yeah.
think that is a really important question to ask ourselves, whatever organization or business that we have. And they were having incredible impact. So we were like, okay, well, let's do something here differently. We also had a different contract that was working. Anyway, we took a bunch
Different
of different kinds
contracts?
of
Yeah.
contracts. We ran events, doing everything off the side of our desk, trying to
Yeah.
figure it out. And then by 2019, we were all just like, let's just go full time in and
Yeah.
figure this out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we
Amazing.
had launched in 2014. And so for the first few years, yeah. And everything we've done, especially in those first years, it was all bootstrapping. There's no there's no tech investment for, hey, you want to open a business that's going to support the social change sector.
So let's talk about this bootstrapping, because I'm thinking about stories I've had lately with my clients, or, you know, you do it, you get through it, Kristi, right? You put band-aid things, you create Excel spreadsheets that you treat like CRMs, you do all sorts of crazy stuff, right? You burn yourself out, you work on weekends. And then someday your personal leadership says, okay, like, we're not doing this way anymore. We're worth more than this. Um, can you align that personal leadership piece with personal growth and organizational growth? Feel like there's like a moment there where you're like, we're going to have to grow this organization and I'm going to have to grow with it. Can you kind of like unpack that a little bit for me?
Yeah. Jenny, it's really key, actually, because I think
Yeah.
they have to happen simultaneously, or I'm not sure how you can go to the next. Me personally, I'm not
Yeah.
sure how you can go to the next level of business, and organizational sort of growth, unless you're having that personal journey of your own growth. So for
Ooh, ooh,
me,
that's so good. That's
oh, thank
so good. Right? So let me just repeat it for our members, because for our listeners, you can't they have to be happening simultaneously. Your personal growth and leadership happening in parallel with the organization. And I think what I heard you say was, and they're in line with each other. You are growing as the org is growing, but that must feel really scary too. You're kind of figuring it out on the fly too.
Yes, I would say there was a lot of times we were building the plane as it was going down the runway. like, and so, but it's also in the framing, right? Like, if you have a vision of where you see the world can be,
Mm,
like, what is like, how do you bring people along a vision? And I
yeah.
think that is a place for me that I just really enjoy, is
Mm,
inspiring people along a vision. And I knew that I could
mm,
do that. But the personal growth, those were my biggest demons that stood in my way. I would say of growth at the organizational
yeah.
level was to stop comparing myself,
Mm-hmm.
stop thinking like that imposter syndrome a bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I read this book, that one of those badass books. I don't know if you've ever read the badass books, and I remember her talking about a lot around, she talked a lot around the negative self-talk we give ourselves, as well as the meditation side over here and hearing the whispers. But it was really fascinating to me, because once I started, I was like, wow, I have a lot of negative self-talk. It might come out as a joke, or it might come out as, I'm trying to make make people feel really good by staying small. All of these sort of pieces that I kind of had to sort of train myself to shift the way, like flip that negative into a positive, and really start to understand where it was okay if I didn't know all the answers. Like, it was
Yeah.
okay. And that it was also okay for me to be an expert.
Hmm.
There's both sides, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
There's so much So a couple things. I just recorded a podcast called "The 7 Ways to Stop Sabotaging Yourself,"
Mhm,
and you related to a couple of them. The self-deprecating comments that I used to make about myself, and like really just to make other people feel comfortable,
mhm,
that I've let go of. The other one I wanted to pick up. There was a moment that you talked about that someday you woke up and said, "This is not acceptable anymore. The way we're running this isn't working for me." And so we have to find another way to work it. And that self leadership piece of I'm worth more than this. I think I can do more on this planet. And a couple of things are going to have to change in order for this to happen.
mhm.
Because you're still, like, to your point, the voices are still there. Like anybody who listening who's saying, well, it must be nice to be Jenny and Kristi because they don't have any self-doubt. No, that's not it. But I have learned how to soften the voice. Even this morning, I was on a coaching call and I work with a colleague of mine and we co-coach each other. And what came up was my fear of being disappointed by people. That if I stretched and if I trusted them, huh, that they would disappoint me. And then all it took was like, well, what if they didn't disappoint me? Huh.
Well, because many people haven't disappointed you. It's just that there's been some key people that have, or you know what I mean. And again, what you talked about earlier about remembering that
Yeah.
negative side, we really, our brains are what's
Yeah.
that word I'm trying to
Predisposed.
disposition
Yep.
to like hearing that negative. And we do it all the time. Like we'll have an event, well, what could we have done better? What could we have done that instead of being like, what worked really well? Like, where were those moments that worked? So all that kind
Yeah.
of shifting of that kind of conversation in your own head and in your teams really starts to change where you focus your energy. Because what I've learned, and I do meditate regularly, and I think it's been a very key part in my leadership journey, is whatever we focus on, we get more of, period. So if you're going to focus on, those little small things that you could have done differently, you're going to get more of those little small things that you should do differently. If you focus on like, wow, that was a really amazing, did you hear that aha moment that participant had in our program? That's making a difference. You're going to get more of those kind of moments.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but it is absolutely being present and conscious every time you do it and stopping yourself. And then you realize you get ahead of it. Like, I think there's a moment that you switch in your personal leadership journey that you actually get ahead of it and it just doesn't happen in the same way anymore. I mean, you might have moments
Yeah.
of, um, oh my, I did a TEDx talk this year, and that was always on my bucket list. So that moment before you're walking onto that stage, of course, on my butterflies, like I'm like sweating, and I
Yeah.
just took some deep breaths, and I
Yeah.
just remembered, right? I've
Yeah.
done this. This is just talking to people.
Yeah.
This is the same thing. It just looks different on the outside.
Yeah.
Nothing's different. It's just you're just chatting, you're having a
Yeah.
conversation, and so you just, I
Mm.
think, build that courage muscle so that it's
Yeah.
okay to be afraid. I just put fear now to the side. I let it still exist, it just
Yeah.
doesn't have to channel through me anymore.
Mm.
And I just am like, well, what is courage? Being afraid and doing it anyways.
Yeah. So that concept of energy, the visual I'm getting is and it ties back to money too. The
Mhm,
visual of building it backwards from the expenses, from the costs,
mhm,
from the worry, from the scarcity, from the fear, versus the visual of building it from the front, from the possibilities, from the revenue that we might be able to have, from the vision of where we could go. I'm not saying it's not black and white. It's not like you can only do one side, but I would totally agree with you that in the not-for-profit sector, we are so predisposed to build from the back, and it really hamstrings not only our budgets, not only our thinking, but our belief in ourselves. This just came together right now.
yeah, it really does. I've always said, and I constantly still say it, is you expand out of debt. You cannot concave out of debt.
Wow. You know, the irony for me though, what's so funny is What do we do in philanthropy? We work with entrepreneurs and people that have big ideas and people that have gobs of money who don't see obstacles the same way we do. And so we have this bizarre disjunct between our experience of the world, oh, scarcity, can I ask for that? Versus the way that an entrepreneur shows up and the mindset work that entrepreneur has done to be in that place where abundance and the next thing is always available to them. What a contrast.
It is a contrast. And if I had one message for the whole nonprofit sector is know your value. Like, nonprofits bring immense value to this world. And it is not a handout value. It is not, the businesses are lucky to partner with you. Like, there is a switch of thinking that every decision changes when you come from that place of abundance over scarcity.
And you stop chasing leads and you start building leads, and you stop chasing money and you start building meaningful, trusting relationships where you mutually agree on a path forward, right?
That's so true. And that's a thing with meditation is they tell you to stop seeking. You're not trying to, whether it's, find the money, find your love, find your home, whatever that thing is that you really want. They say, stop seeking it. Align yourself to your highest being, your truest and most authentic self. And those things will be attracted to you. So that flip of realizing that it's just this change, like it's this flip of how we think. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love to, in this part, well, there's two things I want to do. One is I'd love to talk about tips and ideas. And the second part, I'd love to pick up on the book, Embracing Ambition, because we had a great chin wag about that. Okay, so first part, something I've been doing, and maybe I'm testing this with you, Kristi, is I have suddenly realized how, if I want to grow the business, which I do, if I want to be a better podcaster, be a more effective coach, I must invest in myself, in my craft, in my time, in my thinking. And so I've started every day now, and this is pretty much without fail, it's either exercise or reading. Reading might be, I have some reflections, some Buddhist reflections, which to your point, the book is called Getting Comfortable with Being Uncomfortable. Great name. And I also, the academia, I found that going back to research and reading and adding content and ideas to my head has really changed the flow of my day, for the better, because no longer am I chasing my inbox. I have a purpose and I have a grounding. Besides meditation, are there suggestions for folks to get that space to think and lead effectively?
A few things that I do in my personal life is I'm like you. I'm always trying to learn. I think if we stop learning, there's something that happens. And we live in a very rapidly changing world. So to assume that we know what's right today is going to be the same thing that's right for a process, a system, a solution in 5 years is very different, even in 2 years. So I'm constantly listening to different podcasts like yours, and also other places that I listen to different podcasts. I watch different reels. I follow different leaders that I quite respect some of their thinking. And I'm just constantly, so if there's something we can't figure out, like for an example, with thriving nonprofits, we've before we only did that in a cohort model. So it was all this, it started in Victoria in person, maybe 9 organizations a year. It's very different. You fast forward to today, it's an online hub that, yes, does the cohort model over here, but more like 100 organizations a year. And then we have self-paced for individual learners. We have coaching platform. We've got a online community you can join. There's a learning lab for like specific kinds of courses to really figure out revenue diversification. So that world of how you sell and talk and create impact through those kind of online places, that's all new to me, right?
Wow.
That's not the way I grew. Like, that's not how this business started. And so in this particular area of the business started. So all my professional development is I'm just constantly learning, how do you do things different? It's a science, and so I really do think that's really important. I do spend time in silence. I think there's silence. So that might be me walking, or, sometimes I'm just doing some exercises or workout. So instead of turning the TV on, or sometimes I like music, but, I'll just do things in silence. I learned from a leader, and again, one of these reels or podcasts, and I can't even think of who it was, but that their greatest growth came in the silence, right? And so I've also learned I trust myself. Instead of, one of my goals this year is my first thought that comes into my head, and that whisper in my head, I go with, instead of going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. I just trust that I'm going to go to the right direction. And so exercise, I think, is key. We all feel like there's just that visceral feeling of difference in your body and in your
Yeah.
brain when you're exercising and sleeping
Yeah.
well and all of that sort of nutrition. But I do think that, and letting go, I think for me, for growth, it's also been about letting go of control.
Hmm.
And that is a big muscle to build. And I think if you're number 4, number 3, number 2, it doesn't matter where you are in your organization, especially if you have a team that
Yeah.
is part of your side, you oversee. Letting go of control is one of the best things that we can learn to do. And it's not easy, because we build a culture and our hearts are in the right place because we want to solve problems. And Jenny, the answer to a problem so quickly that maybe one of your team doesn't, because they don't have the experience that you've had, or all the years in your own business, right? Like this sort of place. So it's actually learning. I've installed this 131, which is like, so someone can come and be like, here's the problem, here's the 3 suggestions, and here's the one I suggest. It's great.
So I love that my briefing note example was almost that exact same thing. Like that's really cool. And I'm going to remember that 131. And it's that proactive approach. I don't think people realize, once you get up the food chain, everybody wants to move up the food chain. And when you get to the top of the food chain, your most precious commodity is time and thinking.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have the brain space unless you work with a coach, and I solved something today I was ruminating on, and I just, even saying it out loud, it sounds different, but to be able to prime the pump for your boss, to give them a bit of a heads up. In the Fierce Conversations, there's something called a conflict framework, and it's an interesting one. It like describes all these different pieces, like, here's the issue, here's what's at play, here's how it's impacting, here's what's going to happen if we don't do anything about it. Here are 3 ideas I've thought of, and what other considerations might there be? And I think it really kind of simplifies the process that feels very emotional and emotion based to a bunch of facts and a bunch of a way to not have the people be in conflict, but actually the people working on the issue that is the conflict, that is conflicting.
Yeah. Well, and you can put it back to process. Anytime you can take something back to process, it removes people.
Yeah,
Right.
totally.
And that is just, it just lowers that tension energy,
Yeah.
that sort of place.
Yeah.
But I hear what you're saying. I think it's really interesting, as we grow and move up into different roles, we tend to think it is about solving problems. And it is solving problems maybe for the person that you're then growing into, like the next phase of your growth.
Yeah.
But I've had to learn to stop solving problems, and to, even if
Yes.
I have the answer, to move back and allow others to just solve it, because I cannot be everywhere at any time. And it's more so in the last year or two, like, it is incredible, the time pressure on a leader. And so the more you can think through, the more you can just have leaders all around you solving things, and to really recognize that if 80% of it's done by if it's 80% great done by somebody else, it's awesome. Like, that's 100% great.
Yeah.
That's
And
not,
yeah.
yeah.
And it's the difference to me between solving problems and building capacity. Because what you're really talking about is building capacity, is when you empower people with the tools that they, or you coach people to the tools so that they can make their own best case scenarios and best judgments, for sure.
Yes,
Yeah.
but I also think you have to empower them to be able to make those decisions.
Yep.
I think even people that get tons of capacity building, if there's a culture in your organization that they're used to being able to come to you and just sort of say,
Oh,
"Hey,
yeah.
just really, really quickly, how should I solve that?" And you go like, "Oh, just do it like this," right? And I always thought that open door, that was the right way to lead. But now I've recognized, because now we've continued to grow and we're at that next level of growth,
Yep.
that it's about me practicing and again building my own muscle and my team's muscle to be like, just be like, oh no, you tell me how you think that should go. Like,
Yeah.
you got this. And
Yeah.
then, so you can have all the capacity you want, but you need your leader to have empowered you to be able to actually just go make the decision.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And to
That
trust
can
that no
be
matter,
tough for leaders,
yes,
right?
and trust that no matter how the decision is made and what happens, that the leader will have your back. And either way,
For sure.
is there to troubleshoot afterwards, pros and cons. But you're right about timing and pacing, right? We do not want to be that bottleneck, for sure. For sure, for sure, for sure.
No.
But there's an evolution there. Like when we're talking about this personal and organizational growth, there's
Yes.
definitely, hear those ebbs and flows, right? You're in the trenches entrepreneurship, you plateau, I find the organization catches up with you. And then you grow again because it's needed of you. And then the organization catches up. But at
Yeah.
no time, let's just say this properly, is the organization ahead of you. You are always, I think, personally and professionally, internally growing to bring people along with you. Would you agree?
100%.
Yeah.
The growth will happen through the growth of your personal self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's been my experience.
Yeah.
Oh, such a good conversation. So chewy. Okay, so I want to go to embracing ambition. I want to hear, as a fellow leader, as somebody, what was it about? This is the book. For those of you that don't know it, this is the book that I co-authored with 12 other women CEOs, and talked about the different pillars of experiences that women have. Tell me, were there some that resonated more than others, and maybe what were they?
Sounds great, Jenny. And I would just, if people are listening, the book is fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and it allows you to see yourself. And for me, I found it quite interesting because I kind of went in there going like, okay, what is the chapter I am going to love the most? But as I kept reading, I would be like, oh, there's bits of this one I really see. It's not exactly me on this one, but this
Yeah,
piece is me, and
yeah,
this had to change in my life. So for me, it was, I actually picked up nuggets of
yeah,
um, understanding,
yeah,
and nuggets of empathy for myself, and nuggets of inspiration throughout the whole book. There was a lot. I think the imposter syndrome piece for me was that one for me was, my own personal growth.
mm-hmm.
There was one time I was, although I wasn't, uh, someone didn't get the job over me, which is one of the chapters.
Yeah,
There was a piece in one of the organizations that I had worked incredibly hard on this project, and things had gone so well for the organization, and they were able to have incredible impact and get these resources. And I remember asking for a $2,000 bonus because of all that work. And in my personal life, that meant the time I was away from my children, the time I was away from all the other pieces of my life. And I remember them voting not to give me that $2,000. And in that moment,
yeah,
they lost me. They lost me as they right there. I continued until it was time for me to leave the organization,
yeah,
but that was the piece for me. I thought, wow, I gave a lot and I was overlooked. So it was the overlooking piece. So even though it wasn't exactly the same as the story resonated deeply with me because of that.
yeah,
Um, the visionary ones about, being able to, just step into that space of taking, visions and growing things bigger. So there was so much that, work with me. So I really enjoyed the fact that it was multifaceted
Yeah.
in the different areas of ways that leaders and, women leaders,
Mm-hmm.
they face. So
Mm-hmm.
I really thought, I really enjoyed lots of it.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you for that. And for our listeners, I will make a note of putting the link to the book in the show notes, but you can always find it on my website too. And you just click book and you can buy it from Amazon. You can buy it from me if you want a signed copy. I have been surprised, Kristi. The goal, or maybe I should stop being surprised. Maybe I should just be really pleased and grateful that the book resonated so deeply. One thing I'm particularly proud of, and it ties into this conversation we're having, is the honest version of what leadership looks like. Not just like the shiny textbook, here's how you management consult your way to leadership. The fact that there are errors and mistakes made, and that we get up the next day and we wipe ourselves off and we try something different, that it's imperfect, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We all have different experiences of it based on our stories and our background. But I want to be somebody who is deep in the trenches of the craft of leadership. I want to build it intentionally, and from this conversation we've had, I really sense that you too have an intentional commitment to the pursuit of Kristi's leadership every day.
I do. And, a lot of our work at Scale Collaborative in the end is about leadership.
Yeah.
It is about, leading being the leader that's needed in today's nonprofit organizations. And what does that look like? What are those tangible skills beside it, to sort of understand? We landed in revenue diversification because um, uh, that's the opportunity in our sector. Like, that is something that is so
Mhm.
big, and that's how we shift the economy flow, how the economy works. Like, this is big stuff that we're dealing with. And I also think it's fascinating because I think there's, I'm a kid of the, 70s, 80s, 90s, like this sort of thing. So I'm a kid of the 80s, and we were told for women, and the women we saw that got to success, they had to go into the foots and the shoes of men.
The shapes of men. Yep.
Exactly. And when they didn't behave like men, they got penalized for that. In fact, when they behaved like men, they got penalized for that. So it was this whole thing. But I think there's a new wave that's sort of taking place,
Mhm.
and it's actually allowing ourselves as women to step into
Yep.
the leadership our way and
I love that.
our way. And I mean, it comes up in a lot of ways, right? You see different patterns of how social media is used. You see different patterns of how people make deals, and if they're making one deals, if they're doing collaboration, like all of these different things. And I actually think we're getting to a place where there's more of us here and more of us masses, that we can get to a tipping point where we can sort of be like, actually, this is how the world could run, as well.
Mm, this is how the world could run. Well, thank you, Kristi, for painting a picture for me and for our listeners on 2 things. One, a new paradigm for the social profit sector, a new embracing of our possibility, our strength, and our worth. And then on the personal side, too, for really opening up this conversation with me about how you lead yourself, which I think is the most important relationship what you have is with yourself. So, how can people find out more about you, Kristi? Where should we send them?
Thanks, Jenny. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
We have a few different kinds of, Scale Collaborative has a website, Thriving Nonprofits has a website. And so those 2 places there, organizations can sort of tap in and learn more. And yeah.
You also do a fair bit of speaking too, right? I bet you'd be happy to do. I mean, you strike me as somebody who well, you mentioned the TED Talk, but this would be a great message for some of our conferences, some of our sectors, breaking down barriers between the business and the not-for-profit world. That's, I think, maybe one of your special bridges and gifts too.
Yeah, absolutely. And absolutely open to speaking and conferences or sessions like these
Yeah.
virtual sessions and podcasts.
Yeah.
And I think the more we can lift each other up,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
That we get these messages across, and just like your book
Yeah.
allows us to see ourselves in that place and the solutions and the growth that can happen by going past that. So I'm
Love that.
super interested and excited to, you know, meet with lots of your listeners.
That
Yeah.
would be amazing. I always put this plug in at the end. So if something about this episode resonated with you, if something you went, ooh, that's really cool. First of all, write it down, because if you're in my age group, it'll be gone by 2 hours later. But second of all, let us know. Reach out to Jenny at chavender.com. That's Chavender like lavender. We'd love to hear what parts of this episode resonated with you, where you're at in your leadership journey, and to start, like we said, Kristi, at the beginning, a dialogue about this new paradigm of leadership for women. I agree. The old shoes that we used to have to fit into are too tight. They're too constrictive. They don't emphasize our female strengths and leadership styles. And I think we're opening up the world to a more inclusive style. And I think we need to be our own allies for it. And that's not even to talk about our women of color or people who identify through the BIPOC lens, with their, their opportunities, but also their challenges. The more I learn about it, the better a leader I can be about it. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I guess that's my conclusion. Yeah.
Sounds wonderful.
Sounds wonderful. All right, folks, listen, you have the rest of your day to go to. So I just want to take a moment to say thank you, Kristi. Thank you to our listeners. Always love to hear from you. Today is always another opportunity for you to go and be great. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.